approach immediately. Based on the High Court's directive in December, this approach could not be used in the current tariff cycle. So, however, one thing to note on this approach is to say that in a separate process, we intend on publishing this methodology for consultation and finalizing it before the end of 2022 so that licensees can start to use it to apply for tariffs for the 23-24 financial year. So that was the first approach. The second approach that we considered was benchmarking the municipal tariffs against the ESCOM tariffs. So this approach, in a nutshell, just meant that municipalities would have to charge its customers the same way as ESCOM would. This approach was not recommended because ESCOM's tariffs are actually set to recover ESCOM's revenue-based. This approach is actually set ESCOM. So ESCOM's tariffs are actually set to recover ESCOM's revenues based on its own cost of supply studies. Therefore, these tariffs would not actually be reflective of municipality costs. So this is actually a sentiment that was shared by stakeholders, as they highlighted that ESCOM actually benefits from cross-subsidization from its other businesses, being your transmission and generation, which is a benefit which is not afforded to municipalities. Hence, stakeholders were of the view that this would actually exert a downward pressure on municipal tariffs, and this would actually cripple municipalities further, amongst other issues. So that was the second approach considered. The third approach that was considered was the approval of tariffs based on cost of supply studies, which would then be submitted in line with the NERSA cost of supply framework. Although on this one, one should note that although stakeholders are overwhelmingly in support of this approach, many have noted that the implementation of this approach in the short term is unlikely, and this is mainly due to the lack of financial information availability. This was emphasized to say that the low number of municipalities who are able to produce audited financial statements. So this actually means that the integrity of the information that the municipalities would be submitting to NERSA still remains questionable as a result of this. So if the way we look at it is ultimately this is speaking to a garbage in, garbage out type of scenario whereby the tariffs are actually set based on this approach would not be. So what we're saying is that when we say it's speaking to a garbage in, garbage out, we are saying that tariffs set based on this approach would actually not be truly cost reflective. And some stakeholders have actually taken it a step further to even indicate that if NERSA were to approve tariffs based on these cost of supply studies, that amongst others, that are not based on audited financials. And on the other hand, they've noted that municipalities are not complying with license conditions. So some stakeholders indicated that if NERSA were to approve tariffs based on these cost of supply studies, and we could not satisfy ourselves of those conditions, being that we have the audited financials and we have full compliance with license conditions, stakeholders indicated that these tariffs would then be challenged in court. So effectively, that would be bringing us back to square one, which is what we are actually trying to eliminate. So the one key thing that, the one thing I want to highlight, actually, the one key theme that's emanating from stakeholders is that compliance should actually be the key focus for NERSA, and that NERSA needs to be a bit more heavy-handed in enforcing compliance. In fact, they even proposed that the heavy-handedness should be to an extent of revoking licenses if need be. But on the other hand, once again, the same stakeholders acknowledged an embedded challenge from this approach to say that the question then remains to say, if we do ultimately revoke these licenses, who should we then hand those licenses to? So those are some of the challenges that emanate with this approach. Furthermore, stakeholders actually acknowledged that resolving this issue, and I think this is one of the key highlights when it comes to this topic, to say that stakeholders actually acknowledged that resolving this issue of quality information from municipalities is not something that can be resolved by NERSA unilaterally, but instead we would need an intervention of broader key stakeholders in government to get to the bottom of this issue. So notwithstanding the issues that have been identified, NERSA has actually made extensive efforts in trying to assist licensees in this journey of compliance. One such, I'll just make an example of a few of such measures that we've taken into account. As a deterrence to non-compliance, as a starting point, NERSA is no longer approving the introduction of new tariffs or any form of tariff restructuring or above guideline increases without the submission of a cost of supply study. So those are some of the steps we've taken to try to push licensees towards compliance. And then lastly, but not leastly, the fourth approach that we considered in approving municipal tariffs is actually based on a percentage guideline increase and municipal tariff benchmarks. So with this approach, what we do is that a weighted increase of municipal cost is calculated, and we call this the guideline increase. So this percentage increase is then used by municipalities to apply for a tariff increase. In turn, the tariff increase applied for by municipalities is then evaluated and approved using the set benchmarks. Over and above that, the municipality's financial and technical performance is actually evaluated using the indicators as set out you can see in table 21, which can be found on page 14 of 69. So ultimately, these performance targets try to ensure that municipalities are encouraged to improve on their revenue collection, improve on their energy losses, as well as spend sufficiently on repairs and maintenance of their networks to ensure that there's a delivery of a sustainable and a quality service. The one last thing to mention on this approach is to say that this approach is also not without its challenges, and one key challenge I would like to highlight with this approach is that there will always be outliers who are not catered for in the benchmarks. And an example of such an outlier would be municipalities which are buying at expensive tariffs like Night Save from Eskom, but I won't go deep into that one. But the one thing I will say on that is to say that there is currently a process in place to rationalize these Eskom tariffs that will see such some of these issues. We recommend a parallel implementation of approaches 3 and 4, which is the cost of supply study and the benchmarking, which is, in our view, the most effective approach in terms of practicality and immediate implementation to approve tariffs in the short term. So when we say parallel implementation of approaches 3 and 4, what we mean is that municipalities can then start applying immediately using cost of supply studies for the next financial year. However, just as a highlight, municipalities should take note of the September deadline submission. So this just means that applications based on cost of supply studies should be submitted by no later than the end of September in the preceding financial year. This is just to we have identified that this is a data-intensive approach, so there will be a to and fro. So NERSA should be afforded sufficient time to then evaluate those cost of supply studies. So the one last aspect I'm going to mention around cost, after having approved these cost of supply studies, members should note that we will still undertake a process of tariff rationalization or harmonization, if you may. So this is just to ensure that stakeholders are actually cushioned against price shocks in both directions, that is. And in a nutshell, that is the recommended approach. So next up, for recommendation for approval, we have the performance indicators to be used in analyzing these tariff applications. And this can actually, these performance indicators can actually be found in tables 21 and 23. Table 21 is on page 14, while table 23 is on page 27. Just one slight amendment requested from members is that members are requested to note that table 21 will actually be updated to match table 23. This is because table 21 still reflects the old target for revenue collection, which has a range of between 85% and 100% collection. So the new target for revenue collection is actually set at 95%. So what this means is that this implies that licensees actually have an allowance of only up to 5% for providing for bad debts. So the team would like to highlight to say that although bad debt is not something we would want to encourage, we have to appreciate that there is always a risk involved in providing services on credit. And indeed, we still find that a majority of our municipalities still provide services conventionally using your postpaid as opposed to your prepaid. So over and above that, given the socio-economic and political climate of the country, it is to be expected that there will be customers who are struggling to settle their bills. And then although traditionally you find that such struggles are associated with domestic customers, we have seen the devastating impact of COVID-19 on businesses. So even they too can find themselves struggling to manage the electricity account, especially your small to medium enterprises. That's how we land up on that 5%. So actually, municipalities are actually encouraged to move more towards a dominant prepaid metering systems for its customers to boost collection rates, as a mitigation to this risk. So one incentive that municipalities could actually use would be to even put the prepaid rates a bit lower than your conventional rates to make it a bit more attractive, but they could explore many other measures. But ultimately, we are saying that municipalities should push to have their customers more and more on prepaid. So the one other key change to these, municipalities will now be required to submit what we call a plant condition report. So the expectation is that in submitting this report, it should detail the condition of the municipal infrastructure and should include maintenance plan reports detailing expenditure in this aspect. So the idea on this one is to ensure that municipalities actually spend the budget that has been allocated for repairs and maintenance on the actual infrastructure. So how this actually came about is as a result of stakeholder, though NERSA has a set target of 6% for the purposes of repairs and maintenance, in many instances you find that this budget is actually not used for the intended purpose. Thereby, this exacerbates your dilapidated networks and increasing energy losses. Therefore, going forward, NERSA will be actually monitoring this item very closely. So that's the financial and technical indicators. So next up for approval recommendation is the development of the guideline increase itself. I know I had already touched a bit on it, but so in developing this guideline increase, we actually took the proposed Eskom bulk increase to municipalities and the increase on the other municipal costs. These costs taken into consideration in calculating the guideline increase can be found in table 24, which is on page 22 of 69 in the RFD. And yes, the one key aspect to note is to say that, in fact, the one key aspect of discussion in calculating the guideline increase would be the finance cost. One discussion point on this one was whether we should be allowing municipalities an increase for financial costs, for finance costs for loans that we are not even aware or loans that we are not tracking. So members are actually urged to note that these finance costs include both your capital charges, meaning interest on loans, and it also includes interest that Eskom charges municipalities on overdue accounts. Therefore, the expectation is that as the repo rate keeps fluctuating, it then makes sense that municipalities would also be affected by this. Therefore, this increase should be taken into account in that context. I'm almost at the end. So with the second last item recommended for approval is the benchmarks themselves, and these can be found from page 34 of 69 of the RFD and from table 1 in the decision from page 9 of 69. So a key issue to discuss on this aspect of benchmarks is the treatment of the small-scale embedded generation tariffs. So these small-scale embedded generation tariffs are essentially for customers with embedded generation, such as your solar panels, that actually allow them to generate power for own use. And then these customers actually are able to also export back to the grid. So it needs to be noted, members should note that currently we are still in the process of developing a framework to deal with these types of customers. And as things stand, it's only the registration process and procedure that has been approved. So as a result, we are proposing that licensees applying for these small-scale embedded generation tariffs, we are proposing that these be dealt with in two categories. One, we classify them as being new tariffs, and the second one, we classify them as being existing tariffs, meaning that the regulator has already approved these tariffs in the past. So the first category, like we've mentioned, would be the new tariffs. So what we are saying on this one is that these new tariff applications should be accompanied by a cost of supply study, and these would then be benchmarked against your Eskom Megaflex local authority, and then we put a discount of 10% on that. And then the second one that we have is your existing tariffs. So these would actually then be considered for an increase. And this increase would then be in line with the Eskom increase and not the guideline increase. Just to touch on the reasons for this, this is actually because this tariff is actually benchmarked against an Eskom tariff, like I've indicated. So this tariff will actually experience an increase of 8.61%, which is in line with the other Eskom tariffs, as opposed to your 7.47% increase in line with the rest of the municipal tariffs. So in order to actually then align these new tariffs that we would be approving with your existing tariffs, it then makes sense to escalate or increase these tariffs in line with your with the increase granted to Eskom tariffs. One last aspect to just note around these small-scale embedded generation tariffs is that currently the uptake of this tariff has actually been slow, as the majority of municipalities applying for this tariffs actually do not even have customers or have very limited customers for this tariff. In other instances, you find that municipalities do not even have smart meters capable of actually supporting such a tariff. So you might even want to call this a future tariff, if you will. So I've come to the last item that members are requested to recommend to ER for approval, and that would be the treatment of above guideline increases. So once again, I'd like to mention that although increases above the stated guideline is discouraged, we have noted that a key flaw in using benchmarks is that there will always be outliers who are not sufficiently catered for in these benchmarks of ours. So, and I actually already did touch on this earlier when I indicated that some customers buying on expensive tariffs like your NightSafe can potentially then have a need to be outside of these benchmarks. I touched on that earlier. So what we are proposing is that all licensees who are applying for increases that are above the guideline should be put through a public hearing process, whereby licensees will be required to motivate and present reasons, facts, and evidence for the requested increase. And a public hearing date has actually been pegged for the 15th of June 2022 for this purpose. So members are requested furthermore on this area to note the information requirement that has been set for an application above the guideline increase. And these have actually been put, they start from page 39 of 69. That's where you will find this informational requirements. But just to highlight on that one, these informational requirements include the submission of a cost of supply study as a prerequisite. So what I've just done is that I've taken the members through the 5 areas where the approval is sought or where the recommendation to ER is sought. And I would also furthermore, in concluding, I would like to point the members to annexures to this submission. The first one details the issues that members raised during the public hearing process. And this is the table that starts from page 67 of 69, and it actually details the issues that were raised by members and the areas in the reasons for decision where these issues have actually then been addressed. And the second annexure to this submission is a summary and analysis of all the stakeholder comments, and this can be found ranging from page 42 of 69 in the reasons for decision. With that being said, members actually requested to recommend to ER for approval the recommendations as set out on page 6 of 69. It was a bit long, but I thank you for your indulgence, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chawala. I think you've done it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chawala. Thank you. Yeah, you can mute yourself. You've done a great job, especially considering that members didn't have as much time to actually go through the RFD. I see your hand is up, Mrs. Chotro, before I open it to members. Oh, by the way, Mr. Chawala, you did not deal with that paragraph 4.8. I do believe that you need to correct it. It's not suggested by NESA in its executive committee meeting. That is not correct. Mr. Sichotlo?
Yeah, Chair. Sorry, Chair. Let me start with that one. That correction will definitely be made. But sorry, Chair, I've got flu. But the issue I wanted to talk about, Chairperson, and I thank Tabu for the detailed presentation, taking into account obviously that members got documents very late. But Chair, there's one thing, I think you yourself in person raised it with me in our private conversations about, and I think Mpong was also sometime raised it in another meeting, about why we continue doing the same approach with municipalities like we've done over the years, and this has not worked. Chairperson, we are aware of that and we acknowledge that, but what we decided upon is that since now we've got the 3 principles that have been approved as principles to be used in the pricing approach, we said that though those have been approved, but the implementation thereof seems to be having its own challenges. So we are then saying that let us finalize that part, and then after that we'll change and revamp the whole municipal tariff approach that we are currently embarking on. So please, if you can indulge us on that one, and then we will then, as Mr. Mavuso said at the beginning, immediately July, will then be bringing to you a detailed plan on how we are moving forward in terms of not only the guidelines for next year, but in terms of the whole revamp of the municipal tariff approach. But if you can also maybe allow me, I think Tabu did touch on the SSEGs, but I think Tabu, if you allow me, Chairperson, that Tabu can just link this discussion on the SSEGs with the work that has been done that is being done, and it's in progress, that is being done by Mr. Morweng, so that you guys as members can actually see that we are consistent with the work that is done elsewhere, and then that will give you the comfort. If you can allow that, Mr. Chairperson, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chotlo. I think it would be welcomed if you can maybe add. Mr. Murati, I see your hand is up. Maybe say some guidance from your side.
Chair, good morning, Chairperson, and good morning, members. I think I needed to re-emphasize the point that Brian has just touched on why we have continued doing the same thing in the absence of what could enable us to align with what the electricity pricing policy. My indulgence on this matter is on the premise that the same reasoning has been advanced in our court papers, and it will be remiss of us to attempt to advance different reasons in our court papers on the challenge of that the usage of the municipal tariff guideline, it's not in touch with the statutory framework that is in place. That is in the court case that we're having in the Nelson, like brought by the Nelson Mandela Chamber of Business. So that that reasoning that Brian has advanced is the same reasoning that we have constantly used and we have recorded it as such in the court papers. I just needed to bring that part also to the alert of the members.
Thank you, Mr. Murati. Noted. So members are aware of that. To the extent to which we can discuss that on a matter that is sub judice. But I think Mr. Murati was just trying to guide us in terms of, so perhaps we don't talk about the court case itself, which is still ongoing, but at the same time that we understand that there is alignment in that process. But as requested by Mr. Chotler, can we proceed that part before I open up to members? Murphy? Mr. Chotler. Mr. Chotler, must your hand is up again?
No, sir. I was just making a correction. It's not Mr. Murphy that we are requesting to add on, but I was just saying that Utabo can just maybe elaborate.
Oh, you're expecting a Utabo court. Okay.
I should show the link between what Mr. Murweng are doing and what we are proposing in this particular one with regard to the SSEGs.
Okay. No, thank you. Mr. Chabalala, if you can elaborate further then, please.
I think on this one, Chair, the only one aspect I would like to add onto the treatment for these small-scale embedded generation tariffs is to say that, yes, we've worked closely with the team that will be developing this framework, and we are very much aligned. So this is actually a collective approach that has been decided on, and that's the sort of approach that they will be pursuing in the framework. Maybe the one thing I would like to highlight on this one is to say that the shape or the outcome of the framework, the only difference currently at this point would be the discussions around where the discount should be lying. I know currently we've recommended the 10% discount, but we are exploring the sort of optimum level for this discount. But in a nutshell, we are aligned with that team that will be developing this framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chola. Members, you've got the presentation. I think it was great that Thabo did a far better presentation. I think more extensive than normal, just to accommodate perhaps the issue that may arise in terms of the time of receipt of this submission. So, members, any questions, comments? By show of hands. I'll start with you, Madam Massetti.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I've signed on the submission, but I felt that there are some things that perhaps we need to just uplift because those will form part of the principles that we must use when we are considering the applications for the decision. And I'm taking advantage of the fact that you are chairing the meeting. Chairperson, I would like to start off talking to the issue of the SSEGs, particularly if the team, because they will know better whether we are expecting any new tariffs or a change in tariff structures. Just on the issue of practicality, I hear Thabo saying that if we do get applications that entail new tariffs or new tariff structures, we will have to consider those using the cost of supply study. We know, yes, it is the legal requirement because it is in the EPP, the electricity pricing policy. Now, based on experience, it has been difficult. If, for instance, there are municipalities that are coming up with new tariffs, and such municipalities have not submitted to NERSA their cost of supply beforehand, of which cost of supply ought to have been properly considered and then approved if they satisfied all the requirements. Now, you get the application on tariffs. Are we now expecting that the municipality must at the same time submit their cost of supply? And this is in respect of those municipalities that did not submit their cost of supply. And it will be very difficult for NERSA to start scrutinizing the cost of supply. See if whether or not the costs are fair, and therefore we must approve such tariff structures in their application. I'm looking at the practicality here. We need to be pragmatic here, and we know from experience we couldn't do that, therefore had to decline. We did the same with ESCOM, if you remember that, even last year, because there was no way that NERSA will be able to scrutinize any cost of supply for ESCOM and be able to then apportion cost that they have asked for in respect of or in line with the cost of supply. So that's one thing that we must just be clear in this meeting as we consider the tariff guidelines. The other thing, Chairperson, that perhaps have not been considered with regards to us proceeding, obviously, with the guideline increases as well as tariff benchmarks. We tend to focus more on possible applications that are above guideline increase or above the tariff benchmarks. We don't look into instances or the benchmarks. Number two, they don't have cost of supply, so you don't know their cost to supply electricity. Now, when you look at the markup in terms of the benchmarks, you do find that the markup, yes, it's above this, there's the selling price and the purchasing price. So you find that the markup, yes, it is low, but there is a recovery of cost and a percent and some amount on top of the cost. Now, what will be your basis? As we have looked into it, or the team has always advised that we wanted to just align them with the benchmarks. How do you simply align if the benchmarks are sitting at let's say 70 cents, and we say that and they are sitting at 60 cents. So why do we then take them to 70 cents without knowing their cost of supply? We are saying the cost of supply will be considered if they are applying for above benchmark, but we are not saying when we want to now increase above what they have applied for, so that we bring them in line with the benchmarks. Why do we do that? What will be the basis for that? So that kind of principle has not been articulated here so that we know what is the mechanism or principle that we are going to use to then align them and bring them up when they have not supplied their cost of supply study. So if that can also be clarified, Chairperson, in respect to cost of supply studies and the issue that is raised, I think it's on page. There are no pages. It's paragraph 4.12.4, paragraph 4.12.4, where we talk about the cost of supply, and we mentioned that there are municipalities that submitted, obviously, and the energy regulator has approved those cost of supply. Now we are expecting that there's a likelihood of such municipalities applying for above tariff benchmarks or increase because of the cost of supply. Now, I think we need to then prepare ourselves here, and the team must be in a position to inform us about efficiency measures that must be incorporated, whether the efficiency measures will be based on appropriate and competitive benchmark as was one factor, so that we can then be able to see to what extent then, or whether the costs where that we are going to approve are accurate and fair. So that's the first thing. But also, as indicated, yes, The second thing must then be also the audited financials, and I'm not sure if that we will have with all municipalities, but we do expect that. And then, Chairperson, the issue of the deforms here must come into play as well, because you want to do independent verification and compare the information that the municipality would have submitted for NERSA's consumption. And that information is the one that comes through the deform platform, where we will pick it up. And we also do know that these municipalities submit that cost information to the National Treasury. That's why there's an issue that we try to have compatibility in terms of the systems in order to check what they submit to Treasury and what they submit to the energy regulator, for purposes of the energy regulator to get evidence and facts, and in terms of the accuracy of the information that they provide to us. So the challenge now on the deforms, and this has been the challenge for all the years, is that the information that is uploaded and that we pick up through the deforms is not up to date. There's a time lag, firstly, but also not just the issue of the time lag, like you will get information of 2019 or 2020. So, which is a problem. It's not going to assist you. Now, also, there's an issue of the packaging of that information in a manner that will assist our purpose and our scrutiny. And also, just the accuracy of that information. I don't know to what extent do we do that. All that we rush into is simply to say the information is reliable. And reliable in what sense? Reliable for the purpose of the exercise and analysis that we need to do this year, when that information is the 2019 information. So there's also those kind of things, Chairperson. And even when we say information is reliable, there is no evidence as to how the team has verified that kind of information contained in the deforms with information that the various municipality has submitted elsewhere, as we are working with the National Treasury, particularly on similar information when it comes to municipalities for a number of years, though. So there is that aspect, Chairperson, when we look into the cost of supply, the other information and the kind of due diligence that we need to undertake in order to make sure that we will be assisted by the team in arriving at decisions that will be supported by facts and not just statements that will state that it is reliable without saying what is our basis of saying the information is reliable, and we can and therefore we can trust it in terms of providing or approving the tariffs. I would like to stop there, Chairperson, and I will indicate other points later on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Massetti. Mr. Sibanda?
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to the team. Chair, my first question is around the pricing approaches and the timing thereof. If you look at table 22, that's on page 17. Just want to check whether we are still in line to implement this timetable that's given on table 22, because some of the steps have not been done, and so I'm not too sure whether we're still in line with the timetable. Chairperson, but if you look at paragraph 5.4.2 on page 21, we seem to still expect municipalities to supply us with their cost of supply studies and to use that approach for the 23-24 financial year.
Whereas the timetable on page 17 seems to suggest that we will begin with the ABC approach in the 23-24 financial year. So I just need clarity regarding the two approaches, because on table 22, the final methodology is supposed to be ready for implementation in August. Yet we are still expecting to continue with the cost of supply studies in the next financial year. Perhaps if that can be clarified for me. The next issue for me is reliance on the plant condition reports in lieu of the technical audits. Obviously, we will not be in a position to audit every plant, but I'm just wondering in terms of practicality and whether this is whether we're being realistic here. Perhaps the question is this for immediate implementation, or are we affording municipalities time to come up with these plant condition reports, given obviously the challenges that we have with municipalities in terms of them supplying us with all the relevant information that we require, including cost of supply studies and other information relating to, for instance, the deforms. So now we are requesting further information, or rather further reports in the form of a plant condition report, and I'm not sure whether we are being realistic here, and what the alternative is. I'm not sure whether we've considered perhaps continuing with the technical audits, and at a point where a particular municipality is being audited, we then claw back whatever amounts have not been used for repairs and maintenance. But I'm just saying, I'm just concerned about the practicality of requiring these plant condition reports, given the challenges that we have. And then the next issue for me is around the SSEGs, I think for me the question is whether the two approaches that we are using for SSEGs, one of requiring cost of supply studies and the other of considering a guideline increase, whether these are actually in line with the framework that we are developing. And also given the fact that we heard from George municipality during the hearings that these are actually not your typical tariffs as such. So I wanted to check whether the approaches that we are using, are these in line with the framework that we are developing, because again, it's just a concern to say, given the challenges of that we've had with municipalities around cost of supply studies, we seem to be wanting to continue this with SSEGs as well. Shouldn't we be looking at a different approach to this? The next issue for me is around the impact assessment, and that's on paragraph 14 on page 34. Look, I mean, I guess the idea was to really do an impact assessment here, but I'm not sure whether we've done that. But in any case, we appear to have concentrated on large-scale customers only. That is the impact of these tariffs on large-scale customers only. So it doesn't appear that we've actually done justice to the impact assessment. And then lastly, for me, Chair, it's the table on stakeholder comments. starting from page 36. The concern that I have there is that in most of these, our response is that NERSA acknowledges the comments and will consider them during decision-making process. But we don't demonstrate how we've done that in our reasons document. And we do this in almost quite a number of these comments. So I think it's either we don't demonstrate how we've taken this into account, or we respond, because in my view, probably we will not be in agreement with most of these. So I think we need to then indicate what our position is on some of these comments. Otherwise, then we should be demonstrating how we've taken them into account in the reasons document. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Sibanda. Advocate Sithole.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks to Mr. Chabalala. Chairperson, mine are just 2 points of clarity. I heard him in his presentation saying that the recommended approach is a combination of the cost of supply and the benchmarking approach. And he also highlighted when he was presenting that there were challenges with the utilization of the cost of supply, and one of them being the quality of information that may be submitted by licensees. So my question is, other than really requesting audited information, what other alternative do we have if it happens that a licensee does not submit audited financial or whatever information that we need that needs to be audited? Do we have an alternative in terms of that? And what was also not clear is whether, when we say combination of cost of supply, are we saying, are we going to use them as an alternative? Will we start with the one, and if that doesn't meet the requirements, then we go to benchmarking? So that was not clear to me. Or are we using both in one application? If you can just clarify that to me. And the last point of clarity is with regard to the SSEG framework. I noted that in paragraph 10.2, it said that they are developing it. And I just wanted to get an understanding for myself whether is this something similar to what's called net metering or not, and as well as to just get a time frame as to when do the team believe that they will finalize this particular framework, since it's indicated that they have started with it. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Advocate. Lastly, Mr. Mkhize.
Thanks, Chairperson, and thanks to the presenters. Let me not repeat what my colleagues have said. Safe to say that in terms of the approaches, I'm not so clear, because this APC keeps coming up, right? I would like to know whether are we looking at the APC still prevailing, but then particularly for retail, looking at benchmarking and the cost of supply study in future. Because I had also requested that we be assisted by the team to ensure that we don't being assisted by the team to ensure that we don't I would say just look at this now narrowly, but we take a view in terms of where we are going with the whole pricing mechanism for the electricity industry. And just to give that, I've seen that there's some paragraphs that do talk to that, even outlining that the program in terms of what we want to do. I think the issue that was also raised by Mr. Sibanda earlier on, I don't want to repeat that, but it's outlined on table 22 on page 17 or the black page 17. But I would just like it will help just to give these things very clearly, and it will also talk to the issue as to when are we going to be able, we foresee the delays being dealt with, because we're still dealing with the previous year instead maybe of the past year. So if that clarity could be provided. And then with regard to benchmarks, as outlined there on table 23, I would just really like to know whether have we revisited the benchmarks themselves? For example, if we're talking of the repairs and maintenance being 6%, are we talking 6%? Well, sometimes we talk of 6% as a target instead of 6%. Really, maybe one would say it's an average or the branch as a benchmark. But if you look at the table 23, you get an impression that 6% that it's actually a minimum. Even the issues of these, to say, have we really interrogated the benchmarks themselves further to deal with issues of efficiency as well as being prudent. And then lastly, from my side, the issues of plant condition report as well as the cost of supply studies, just to understand what will change to enable that these to be done and promptly undertaken and complied with in future. I think it will help just to give an impression. Also, look at the issue of resource requirements from our side, because if you get a plant condition report, there's a need. I think as a regulator, we won't just be taking these things as they are provided to us. We'll then have to interrogate and see if really everything is actually as stated. Are they adhering to certain standards that are required? What sort of methodologies have they used to come to a conclusion of the state of that plant? So for me, that will be important to also have a view around our resource requirements, because we keep saying we need certain things done, but I don't think that we're also doing the proper adjustments on our side to be in a position to undertake or to oversee those activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I see Mr. Sibanda, your hand is up again. Does it follow up to add something?
Chair, just a small one from my side that I omitted under surcharges on paragraph 13.3. Chair, may I please propose that we delete that whole first sentence and probably just begin the paragraph with according to the ERA licenses, blah, blah, blah. And my concern there is that on the one hand, we're saying we don't have powers to regulate surcharges, but on the other hand, we are saying, well, these surcharges should not be included in the tariff. So I feel perhaps we might be shooting ourselves in the foot, but I think we probably can just keep it clean just by starting with the sentence that says, according to the ERA, licenses must charge whatever, and then yes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sibanda. Madam Pomosa, the hand is up now.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. I've been covered to a large extent by my colleagues, by the questions and comments they've made thus far. I think one thing that I wanted, if the team can assist us with, their presentation was quite comprehensive. If they can assist with, the option 4 that they have proposed, or rather have recommended, that we use the Eskom's guideline tariff coupled with the municipality's own increase to their cost structures. How do we as a regulator make sure that, we balance the interests of the municipality in making sure they recover their cost of doing business, yet at the same time, the users or the consumers, customers of municipalities get a reliable tariff that is not inbuilt by a lot of fat due to inefficiencies that could be being either in collections or the provision of services, energy losses that the municipalities could be experienced as a result of lack of maintenance and the likes. I mean, we've had the frustrations or the challenges that they have countrywide. But then, how do we make sure then that, there are no fats built into the tariff that the municipality ultimately is approved for? And then another thing, with regard, if we intend indeed to use the cost of supply studies in the future, What are we putting in place to ensure that we assist? I know we've been providing some guidance to municipalities on how to draft or work on their cost of supply studies, but the reality is that we do know that they are struggling due to the fact that they don't have reliable information, and we don't know if the financial information that they'll be providing has been vetted and audited. And do we have a timeline? Because I think it's only fair that a timeline should be set on how this whole requirement will be phased in, so that it's practical and realistic, and we get as many municipalities as possible to comply with this requirement. Because as much as we'd like to enforce and be harsh on municipalities to say you're non-compliant, we know the realities on the ground. Others, especially metros, you find that they're in a better position to improve their systems and get reliable information, and their management of information and financial information is much more reliable, or they can invest in the right people to support them. So those are my questions, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Maybe colleagues, as you answer, can you just expand on something? We've been talking about SSEGs, which are basically still 1 megabyte. 1 megabyte, 1 megawatt and lower. But we know that now embedded generation has not been allowed to up to 100 megawatts. Now, to the extent to which we make reference to SSEGs, do we exclude these other embedded generators? What if we have an embedded generator that has been envisaging selling excess power to the municipality, and in terms of our registration process, they are allowed to actually produce for own consumption and also to be able to resell. Now, all of these conversations, do we limit the analysis to just the previously allowed SSEGs, or do you also include the other embedded generation as the threshold now has been increased to 100 megawatts? So if you can talk to that a little bit, Thabo, I would appreciate that. And secondly, if we can talk to the issue of reseller tariffs. We deal a lot with municipal tariffs, but we do know that especially people that live in estates, that they deal a lot with resellers, be it prepaid or postpaid tariffs, that actually they may not necessarily get, there may not be a resemblance of the tariffs that they get with the tariffs that you approve. Now, the question is, how do we regulate this? How do we ensure compliance? I know that resellers are supposed to charge a tariff that is the same, I would assume similar or exactly the same as that of the municipality or the trader or the distributor, that on behalf of which they are actually reselling. But I've had personal experiences with one that I won't mention by name in this public platform. But the issue is, it's quite clear they charge a very different tariff. Which tariff are they supposed to charge, and how do we check on that? So that's the other thing that I would really like to have your comment on, especially for those people that, yes, they see these tariffs that we approve, but they experience very different tariffs on the ground. But before you answer, I just thought I would actually guide members a little bit. There's an issue here about the emerging tariff methodology versus what we have. Colleagues, as you would know, that the view, and you would know, and we have this particular matter might be before court, therefore I might not talk to it in detail, but the whole issue of concerns around how we regulate municipal tariffs. So that we don't, I won't talk too much detail on that. But the point is here is that we know we are transitioning. And transitions, by their very nature, are very difficult because until we've put to bed and the methodology has been clearly articulated, the approach has been clearly, this ABC approach has been clearly articulated, or the three principles approach has been clearly detailed in our methodology. We can't be expecting anybody to actually submit any tariff applications based on it. But as indicated by the team, I think that the approach of activity-based costing, of the clear indication of the build-up of the tariff, is generally supported, but it's going to take time. We are transitioning to it. Now, the question that that emerges is, to what extent do we continue with the current whilst we are implementing the emerging approach? I think, colleagues, I think it's going to be important that we acknowledge that even once the methodology has been clearly articulated, written down properly, it's going to take at least 2 years for the licensees, all of them, to migrate towards, for instance, the data that will be required in the manner that that methodology would require it. And therefore, we need in our minds to see that in the next 2 years, or maybe even 3 financial years, we will be dealing with migrations, we'll be dealing with a mixture of submissions. Some municipalities might be ahead of others, but the general direction is one of going activity-based costing. And therefore, to the extent to which even the cost of supply studies as that option 3 that has been put forward by the team is that it may be used. But we are just being realistic that as we transition into this new space, that transition itself is going to take time. So I just thought, colleagues, I would raise this issue. I know it might be confusing to the extent to which, even if the team has managed to finalize the actual methodology and the ER has approved the new methodology, but the approval itself will not mean that we'll be able to implement it next year. It does mean that we'll need to have some kind of transitional arrangement, and those would vary from municipality to municipality depending on their readiness. Some municipalities honestly do not keep costs in the manner that would be useful for us to actually set tariffs. Others do. So others might need to be handheld through the transition process. Others might just be ready on day one. Maybe they've been anticipating this process, and for their own individual, for their purposes, they may have been collecting that information in the first place. So I just like to raise that, colleagues, that I know it causes some kind of discomforts in terms of the methodologies that are being put, or the options that are being put forward, and us migrating to an activity-based tariff approach, which is where directionally that's where we are going. But with that, can I then ask the team to respond? I see Mrs. Chotlo's hand is up, but can I hand it to you, Mrs. Chotlo, and the team, Mr. Chavala, that you respond to all of the questions that have been asked by members? Thank you.
No, thanks, Chair. I don't want to get into the details. I think Tabu will come in. But I think the one issue that has been raised by most of the members is the future outlook. And Chairperson, I would like to ask again, say that we are in the middle of this process, the cycle, and the cycle normally ends at the end of June. And can I then request that the issues regarding the future outlook, when we come, remember when Mr. Mavuso and myself opened up the meeting, we said that we will be bringing a comprehensive plan to the members as to how we deal with what you just said, the ABC, what members have said about other processes regarding the principles that have been adopted by the regulator. Can I ask that those, from our side, we are not going to be able to respond to them immediately, but then when we come to the July meeting, once we've done with the in fact, if I were to say, Chairperson, I don't want to pull your hand too much, but I would even say that indulgence would be for August, but we'll push it for July. Then we bring to you a comprehensive project plan. We have already done one that involves most of what ESCOM issues are, but then we'll need to think about how do we then filter in or factor in the ones that relate to municipalities. So if those can, for now, with your permission, Chairperson and members' indulgence, that we bank those and then we bring them to that July meeting. I think will be, if we try to answer now, we'll only be responding from the CAF, and I think we might just miss certain issues that needs proper thinking. Can I ask for that, Chairperson, please? And then Thabo can then take with, continue with the other questions, and members of the team are also, they will also assist him. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shotlo. Over to you, Mr. Chabalala.
Thank you, Chairperson. I think the starting point would be the issue around the various approaches and in terms of direction-wise. On that one, I'm happy to say that, Chairperson, you've covered the issues quite clearly, fully enough to explain the sort of general direction that we are leaning towards ABC. I'm happy with your response, and I believe that covers us in terms of exactly where we intend to go. So I'm going to touch on, I think before I touch on some of the issues, I would like to explain to say that, the municipal guideline increase and benchmarks, it's part of it's part of a value chain. So it is not surprising that some of the other projects then start to creep in into this project itself. So what I'm referring to is that in as much as we have touched on, as an example, issues that are coming up around cost of supply, there is a separate project which actually then deals with some of these issues in more intricate detail. So in this particular aspect, or in this particular project, we just try to highlight some of the issues that are emanating from some of those streams. So it will actually not do it justice if we try to respond on some of the issues. I know that there's normally updates that are then provided around, particularly around the cost of supply studies. I think maybe I will take this opportunity maybe to request one of my colleagues who's leading up with the cost of supply project to maybe then just give us maybe a brief taste in terms of what is coming in the direction of the members in terms of updates and any challenges or any other issues really relating to cost of supply studies. Dr. Konjolo, if maybe you can assist on this one to just brief members in terms of what to expect from the cost of supply project. Thank you.
Dr. Kay. It looks like he's on the call, but I can't.
Chair, can I suggest that maybe Thabo deals with the rest of the other questions, and then I'll try and get to understand what is happening with Dr. Konjolo, and then he can come at the end so that we don't delay the meeting.
All right. Can I also suggest, Thabo, that you actually go through them as they arose, so that at least we deal with all of the issues that have been raised. You can indicate those that we are deferring based on the request by Mr. Sechotlo, and maybe based on the explanation I may have provided. But if you can just go through this in the order in which they appeared, so that at least all the members would actually feel that their questions have been responded to.
Noted. I'll try to do that to a large extent as much as possible. Thank you, Chair. So maybe I will start with Ms. Maseti first. She raised issues around the SSEG tariffs, to say that are we expecting any new tariffs or change in cost or change in structures, and will we be considering this cost of supplies? And the requirement is to say that in considering these new tariffs or changes in structures, we will be considering them using cost of supply studies. And the question was around the practicality thereof, to say that, are we going to be implementing this? And the response to that is to say that we've indicated the sort of timelines that we require for tariffs to be considered using these cost of supply studies. And we have said that immediately for the next tariff cycle, municipalities are urged to then start submitting these cost of supply studies with closing date of September in the preceding financial year, to ensure that NERSA is afforded sufficient time to then actually deal with these with the analysis and the implementation of these cost of supply studies. But once again, I'd like to highlight, I know I had highlighted in my presentation to say that the approval of these cost of supply studies is actually not the end of the road, but furthermore to that, we still then as a team get to undertake that tariff rationalization or harmonization process of the tariffs, whereby we question where they are and the general direction in which they are headed. That's the first question I wanted to touch on. The second question that Ms. Masetti raised was around your guideline was around tariffs that are anticipated to be above guideline increases. The one key question that she raised was to say that yes, in as much as we have detailed that we consider these above guideline increases, how do we then take into account or how do we then deal with municipalities that are below the benchmark? And the one aspect that she raised is to say that historically, and once again, it's other projects then creeping into the to the guideline again. So the issue that she raised here was to say that historically, in approving some of these above guideline increases, the main reasoning that we would be using is to say that it's the intention is to align with the benchmarks. But our benchmarks, she's questioning to say that how do we then justify doing that if our benchmarks are actually not cost explicit? And then once again on this one, I'm going to respond to say, I also touched again on this issue where we said now we are starting to drive a sort of, we are championing a sort of a compliance drive within municipalities to say that this is one of the areas that we are saying that it's no longer acceptable to merely be saying that we will be trying to be moving you towards benchmarks. So what we are saying is that if indeed they are identifying a need to be increasing above benchmarks, we need these cost of supply studies at the back of it. They need to demonstrate to the regulator to say that, look, costs have been taken into account, this tariff is insufficient, and this is the work that has gone behind all of that, and that's how we get to an increase above guideline. And that also should then be subjected to that process, similar to what other above guideline increases get to go through, in the sense that there has to be a public participation, they have to justify exactly how they got to the conclusion that they got to. The other issue that Ms. Masetti,
maybe can you then raise the issue, since on that issue it's also below benchmark. As we've got a tendency of adjusting up, but that's the question she was asking. How do we deal with that? The tariffs that are lower than benchmark, how do we do that when there are no studies applied? We can deal with that as well.
Yes, Mr. Gumet, I actually thought I had touched on that in saying that historically, it would be reason enough to say that when approving these tariffs, the main reasoning for allowing that above guideline increase, we would stipulate that it is an attempt by the regulator to then align these lower tariffs to benchmarks. We are saying now that because we are pushing for this compliance drive, we are rather saying that these municipalities should then come to us with that cost of supply study to say that, demonstrate to us how you feel that the tariff that you have is insufficient. It's no longer just going to be as simple as saying that because you are below these benchmarks, and then we'll be approving you for those.
Okay, noted. Thanks. See, Mr. Soto wants to add.
No, Chair, I think Tate Chabalala has covered me.
All right, thank you. If you can proceed, noted. Thank you.
The next issue that Ms. Masetti raised was around deforms, and Tate again, I'm going to request your assistance on this one. So the issue that Ms. Masetti raised here around deforms is to say that how do we test for information asymmetry in terms of the information that the deform information that we get from municipalities for NERSA purposes when compared to the likes of other departments such as your National Treasury? Is there a comparison to an extent to see that are we actually getting the same set of information, meaning that that's how the issue of asymmetry came about, to say that what role are we as NERSA playing in order to ensure information asymmetry? I think on this one, Ntatentakin, if you can just come in and assist on that question, thank you.
Again, maybe Thabo, can I suggest as Ms. Chotri? Other members to assist you with, and then proceed. But maybe on your side, respond to everything that you can respond on, but indicate the areas where you may need support. I think that might be far more efficient.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Noted. Maybe I should perhaps start by doing that. Issues that have come up, like I indicated, touch on various projects, and such include cost of supply issues. I'm going to request that Dr. Konjoy actually then come in and assist. The next issues that then emanate from other projects that would need assistance is around your deforms. I'm going to be requesting that and that Ntageni touches on that one. The other issue that I remember is going to creep in again is your small-scale embedded generation. And in terms of, I remember it was raised by CEO to say that actually how far are we in that process and the sort of timelines that we're expecting on that one. I'm actually going to request that Ndate Mwefi then comes in and assists on that one. And then the last one that I can remember whereby we might actually require assistance is to say that it was a question, I think it was raised by Mr. Sibanda, around the practicalities of the technical audits and the possibility or the extent to which we undertake those. I'll be requiring assistance. I think it's from Ndate CML and team on that one around technical audits. Thank you, Chair. I'll then proceed to what I'll do is that I've actually noted a lot of key enhancement requests, and I'll take that into account to say that most of these will then be addressed in a text change document in the submission to ER. We will do that, and then some of these other questions then I shall proceed to tackle. Thank you, Chair. So I think I've covered all the questions I've noted from Ms. Aseti. The next one I have is from Mr. Sibanda. The first enhancement request is around surcharges, to say that we should delete the whole sentence. And it's only now that I pick up that perhaps I should have mentioned again to say that maybe it would be nice on this one to have sort of legal just chip in to say that and put forth a position that we will then cement properly going forward on this issue. So the first question I've noted on Mr. Sibanda would be to say that the first question is actually around the pricing principles. Are we still in line to achieve what is in Table 22? I think on that one, what I can commit to is to say that we will align with the team that is dealing with the development of those ABC principles in the interest of time. So what we'll do is that we will align with that team and ensure that whatever table we put forth, I know this is it's sort of a living sort of creature. It's developing as time goes by. So what I'll do is I'll be in touch with the team to ensure that the timelines that we put forth are the most recent and the most relevant timelines that we are targeting. That's why actually in my presentation, I was a bit vague to say that the intention is to complete these principles by the end of 2022, but we will then update that table to ensure that it speaks to the sort of latest timelines that we have on that one. The next question that we have, it's also from Mr. Sibanda, and it was around the clarity between the sort of ABC approach and your cost of supply approach. I will not delve onto that one because I'm actually quite happy to say that Mr. Gumede touched on this one in quite intricate detail. So I will sort of try to move on to the next question. On giving municipalities time. And the other question stems to say that what alternatives do we have, and have we continued? Have we considered continuing with technical audit? And the concern around there was the practicality of requiring these reports, given the challenges that we have. So to respond to Mr. Sibanda on this one, the truth of the matter is that we have actually. This actually somehow the request for these plant condition reports actually stems from some of the results of these technical audits. You know, we have identified to say that perhaps we maybe, let me not try to sugarcoat it. NERSA does not have the capacity to undertake technical audits for all municipalities for every year. So in trying to mitigate against such an issue, we are saying that perhaps we should look into other avenues, perhaps by requesting municipalities to then submit these reports, but then that actually then to an extent assist these technical audits. But we are in no way saying that this should be a replacement of these technical audits, but instead we are trying to assist the process of these technical audits. And what the team will then be doing is that they'll be working closely with the NERSA audit team that undertakes these technical audits to ensure that indeed what is being and I'll touch on it again later to say that will we be scrutinizing the sort of standards that they are setting in submitting these condition reports. So yes, we'll be working quite closely with the audit team, who will then be able to satisfy themselves that indeed what we are getting is in line with standards and principles which we would require municipalities to adhere to. The next question that I have for Mr. Sibanda is around the SSEGs, and in a nutshell, he was just questioning to say that is this approach in line with the framework that is being developed. I know that my colleague will come in later and speak to the framework, not only the content, but also the timeline. But I know that Mr. Sibanda had actually mentioned some of the issues that George spoke to, and we actually then looked into. I know George presented in that public hearing, and this issue of SSEGs came up, and they were actually quite happy with the approach that came up, and they were actually quite happy with that 10% discount benchmark that we had put forth. And it's not just George, just to put that disclaimer, there are other stakeholders which are actually happy with this approach. But like I've indicated, in developing this SSEG framework, that discount, I know specifically, it's one of the areas that are going to be targeted for intense debate to try to get to the essence to say that which is the perfect discount level we should be allowing to incentivize this tariff. I think lastly on this one, the question that Mr. Sibanda raised again is around the impact assessment, and he noted to say that the idea was to do an impact assessment, and he was not happy with the fact that we seem to have focused mainly on large customers. So maybe to respond on this one, I want to take it a step back a bit to say that remember that this is actually a value chain in getting to the municipal tariffs, and in getting to these municipal tariffs or in getting to these guidelines, so to speak. This is actually influenced by other processes, and by other processes, I'm actually referring to the ESCOM revenue approval process. So what happens there is that we actually go extreme or in intense detail, we actually assess the impact of all expenditure elements of Eskom in getting to a revenue decision. So in as much as this is not coming out for municipalities, this is actually a trickle-down effect in the sense that it has already been done, and economic assessment study has been undertaken, and all those efficiency tests have been undertaken in approving those Eskom revenues. So this is actually just the pass-through cost that is being sent then down. Maybe pass-through cost is not the proper term to be using, but this is the sort of costs that then get to trickle down to municipalities. Those have actually been taken into account in approving that Eskom revenue. So, and if you can see in developing this guideline for municipalities, you find that a major contributor to this guideline increase is the Eskom increase to municipalities, and I believe it's sitting above 74%, so which is a significant percentage of the municipal cost. So yes, in undertaking this impact assessment for these municipalities, there's no separate assessment that has been taken, but instead we should look at it from a broader aspect of things to say that this was actually considered in intense detail in approving the Eskom revenues that trickle down. And then lastly, on Mr. Sibanda again, there was a comment on stakeholder comments to say that the concern is that in response to most of these stakeholder comments, we have merely indicated that this will be taken into consideration, and the direction was to say that, or the directive from Mr. Sibanda on this one is to say that we need to respond and indicate our position in these comments, especially in light of the areas where we either disagree with them or we have not incorporated them into the reasons for decision. This enhancement has been noted and will be effected as requested. And then next on the list, I have questions from Mr. Mkhize. The first question that Mr. Mkhize raised, once again, it's around the implementation of the approaches, and the name and the activity-based costing approach then comes up again. Mr. Gumete has dealt sufficiently with that one, so I will not go back onto that one. The next, I believe the next one was an enhancement issue that you raised around table 22 on page 17, that will be dealt with. In fact, holistically, the same comment then applies even for the questions raised by other members. All enhancement issues will be taken into account, and these will be then submitted. When we go to ER, you'll start to see some of these changes in track changes. So we will have two documents, a clean document, and the other one will be in track changes for members to then get to see where their enhancement requests have been dealt with. Let me see. The next question that came up by Mr. Mkhize is the issue around the 6% benchmark for repairs and maintenance, and whether we have, in a nutshell, whether we have tested the relevance of this. To be honest, the issue of the 6% benchmark and whether it's relevant for municipalities, this is a tough one in the sense that it came up actually during these stakeholder consultations to say that 6% on its own, yes, they agree. A lot of stakeholders agree that 6% is actually an acceptable benchmark. However, one cannot then divorce themselves from saying that municipalities differ and the requirements will never be the same. For two such municipalities. One municipality is on the extreme left, you find that they are a small municipality, and then on the extreme right, you find that we have the metros. So that 6% benchmark will not actually affect them in a similar way. So that's why we've actually then started to say that although it's not something we recognize or acknowledge that, although this is not something that's going to be immediately implementable, it might require some time. But the reason that we've started requesting that municipalities submit these repairs and maintenance reports that actually then detail some of this expenditure in light of the condition of the infrastructure. That's then where we can then start to sort of take decisions in terms of should this municipality actually be requested to budget a bit more of its revenue for the purposes of catching up to the infrastructure backlogs, or is this municipality actually performing quite well? And obviously, we could take into account the sort of energy losses that these municipalities are experiencing. This is actually a good yardstick measure to say that where the municipalities should actually supposed to be sitting, whether in terms of above the 6% or below the 6%. So these are some of the questions that we are then starting to interrogate around the 6% benchmark. We are not taking it as it is. The last question I have, in fact, I am quite happy that Mr. Mkhize raised this last question. It's very important to note, the question that Mr. Mkhize was asking on this one is to say that, we keep requesting some of these things and proposing sort of solutions to some of these issues that we have. But will these be able to be done or will these be able to be promptly undertaken, considering as one of the key aspects, the issue around resource requirements? I think maybe that issue is one that should be then tackled by management to say that maybe on a separate process, we need to then start to identify to say that, look, our processes are starting to change intensely. It's not only around issues such as repairs and maintenance. Yes, we are now starting to get a bit more technical. We will require resources to then start to sort of interrogate those submissions by municipalities. We are taking it a step further in terms of cost of supply studies. We are pushing a drive to say that we are expecting that municipalities should start to submit these cost of supply studies in droves. What are we doing as NERSA to meet the sort of resource requirements that comes with the submission of those cost of supply studies? Lastly, again, we are anticipating that we'll be moving towards a sort of ABC approach. The question needs to be put again, maybe at a different committee, to say that what sort of steps are we taking to ensure that our resource requirements are actually met in terms of all that which we are trying to achieve in the electricity supply industry. That's the last question that I had around Mr. Mkhize. And the last questions that I have is around Ms. Mezandile. And the first question that she asked was to say that the team should assist with option 4 on how do we ensure that municipalities recover their cost of providing services. And on this one, look, again, it then boils down to what we are trying to achieve holistically in terms of the sort of direction that we are heading towards. In the ABC approach specifically, I'll touch briefly on it to say that the intention on this one is to then sort of gather some of these costs from municipalities. So going forward, yes, this is something that will be extensively covered, and that's what we are actually moving towards. And this actually covers the next question, which was sort of an enhancement to the first question, to say that how do we ensure that there is no fat in these tariffs approved. Fact is, on that one, that's why we are moving more towards sort of cost approaches, if you may. This is exactly to ensure that no fat will be embedded in these tariffs that we approve. The last question that I have from Ms. Mbongo was to say that we say that we intend to use these cost of supply studies, but what are we doing to assist these municipalities? And then timelines should be set to get these municipalities to comply. I had already indicated that colleagues can provide more intricate details around this cost of supply study as a project in terms of where we are going. But if there's one thing I would like to touch on around this cost of supply studies is that in terms of assistance that has been provided for municipalities, we have developed a tool. In fact, maybe I put it wrong by saying that Sustainable Energy Africa, which is a non-profit organization, in conjunction with NERSA and various other stakeholders, we have developed a simplified tool to assist municipalities with cost of supply studies. And this is readily available on the NERSA website. I think for now, in terms of assistance, we have tried to list I believe we have listed some of the assistance provided, but colleagues, again, when coming to reporting on the actual cost of supply studies project as a project itself, you will get a bit more deeper detail around that. But for now, please just note to say that we have a tool that is readily available for municipalities to use, which is a simplified cost of supply tool. And then lastly, but not leastly, we have concerns or issues that were raised by CEO Menomalanga Stole. So the first issue that she mentioned was that the recommended approach in the current cycle happens to be a combination of the cost of supply studies and benchmarking. And she appreciated that we highlighted challenges, or at least stakeholders highlighted challenges around quality of information that has been submitted. And the question asked there was to say that what alternatives do we then have at our exposal if licensees do not submit these audited financial statements. Even on that one, I believe on data issues, I had indicated that colleagues would then come in where there's specific projects looking into such things. This one actually touches around deforms also, whereby Ntatenta can take you through that in instances whereby we are dealing with issues of no audited financials that have been submitted. What are the sort of alternatives we look into? I'm not sure if this is the last one, but the other question that I have from Mesitole was around the SSEGs. I'm not sure if that was Mr. Gumeto of this, or if it was Mesitole, but the question was to say that I think it was, I can't confirm. So the question was to say that around SSEGs, we said that we are developing it. Is it something similar to net metering? And when does the team intend on finalizing on this framework? Once again, similarly to the cost of supply, I will leave it to Ntate Moreng to discuss issues around finalization and the similarities to net metering, or if whether it's a matter of just different terms for the same thing. And in fact, in the same vein, the first issue that Mr. Gumete raised was around the capacity of SSEGs and the threshold of the 1 megawatt being raised to 100 megawatt and the implications thereof when there is excess power, etc. Can I request that also then be touched on when we deal extensively with the SSEG tariffs project? And then lastly, but not leastly, Mr. Gumete raised the issue around reseller tariffs, and the concerns around how do we ensure that resellers actually then comply to our requirement to say that licensees or resellers should ensure that they charge tariffs the same way as municipalities. I think the issue there was around compliance in terms of how do we then enforce that. And also on that one, I think I'm not too sure who heads up the reseller tariff stream, but colleagues, if you could also then come in and touch on the sort of developments around reseller tariffs and how we would deal with compliance issues where resellers are not adhering to our request to charge tariffs that are similar or the same as municipalities. Those are the questions that I have covered on my end, Chair. I hope I have covered all members with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chabalala. You can mute yourself. Mr. Mavuso, you had indicated others that will maybe start with Mrs. Chotlo if we can respond to the cost of supply. As you've indicated, Dr. K has some problems, and then Mr. Mavuso, if we can then request, I think both Mr. Shozi and Mr. CML to address the other issues on technical audits and SSEGs. If we can proceed that way, please.
Yeah, Chair, firstly, I think Dr. K was able to sort out some of his problems, but because he was not in the meeting at the time that these questions were asked, let me try, and then if I'm not closing the gap, then he can come in. Chair, what is happening with regard to this project, which has been a thorny one over the years? What has happened is that at the beginning, we never had appetite and uptake from municipalities. But in a way, I think NERSA opened up a market, because now we've got a number of consultants that have taken interest in this new kind of a market. One such person was the Dr. Barnard, who actually presented at the meeting, at the public hearing on Friday. But also there are a few other consulting firms that has come up, and we have seen not huge, but some improvement in terms of the uptake. The only challenge we're still having now is that some of the submissions by these municipalities are not fully compliant with our framework. But it's much better because now there is communication. In the past, you'd write letters, and there was no response from municipalities. But what we have seen now is that we are receiving them, and we are communicating back to them and telling them to improve on certain categories of what they are presenting, and they are actually responding. So I'm happy to say that we are actually seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And then coming to the part of how do we then deal with the cost of supply issues in terms of the tariffs. You may recall, Chairperson, that last year, I think we received one, in my recollection, I think it was from George, and we used that to do their tariff reviews. And our intention, Chairperson, is to actually take knowledge from that and use it from those that have actually completely complied and sent their cost of supply studies, such that their tariffs are actually based on a cost of supply study instead of the guideline, as we've already concluded that the issue of using guidelines is not a way of actually regulating an industry with so many different characters, like we've spoken about metros, very different from a small municipality, but we are using the same benchmarks for those. So we are getting drips and tracks of these cost of supply studies, and I'm happy to report today that we are starting to actually study the municipalities and look at how efficient they are, how prudently they incur their costs, and in going forward, we'll then be able to apply these cost of supply studies in approving tariffs, but obviously in conjunction with the three principles that we have already adopted. I think I'll end it there, Chair. I think, that's where I'll end it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mavuso.
Thank you, Chair. The one on SSCGs, like Monty said, you take, there's an explanation that he proposes to make. Monty, can you take the floor?
Thanks, Mr. Mavuso. Good morning, Chairperson and the members. Yeah, around the SSCG rules, Chairperson, is that we were kind of overtaken by events, because initially the rules were meant for facilities up to 1 megawatt. As you correctly indicated, that is no longer a case. We have up until 100. So we, as a team, has sat down and we are in the process of reviewing the rules so that the rules align themselves with the changes that have happened in the previous months. We will then update the consultation paper, which will be submitted to the ELS for approval, so that it can be sent out to the industry for comments. That process is underway. Probably we are looking at the end of June. We should be in the process of in a position of having that consultation paper sent out, so that the industry can comment on the revised rules, on the draft rules that were initially intended for 1 megawatt. But it cannot be that a plant of what more than 1 megawatt is still referred as a small scale. It will be an embedded generator, but not a small scale. So we need to relook at the technical requirements that we had initially wanted to propose, and the intention of the rules. So in a nutshell, we will be submitting a revised consultation paper and the draft rules for further consultation with the industry. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Shoza. Mr. Siamela, on the other matter.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, members. I'm also not well. I've got flu. Regarding audits, okay, I just want to give some bit of background so for the members can be able to understand. In the past, we used to do both independent technical audits and compliance audits, but some years ago, it was decided that to increase the capacity of NERSA and the skills of doing audits, we'll only do compliance audits. There is a framework for distribution, transmission, and generation. However, this framework for distribution, because we're talking distribution today, it doesn't differentiate like when you audit a metro, as it was mentioned before, a secondary municipality or a small municipality. So what we did, we reinitiated the independent technical audit. The reason why there's a delay in that regard, or the independent technical audit and in implementing the budget that we put through is because there's a suspension on procurement. So we need to do an exemption to National Treasury to make sure that that project gets implemented. Even the way we're going to implement the project, we're going to change the way we do it. We've discussed with legal, and then Ms. Advocate Murati can actually provide some inputs in that regard, the way we've discussed it. I'm sorry, there's a helicopter here in the event you don't hear. I think I've covered that because most of the things were covered, but the most important thing is the fact that, we have to change the way we do things to make sure that there's an improvement and even the turnaround time, and we make sure that, our audits are effective, even in costs. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. From LAS, yes, from LAS, if we can talk to that issue around surcharges, please. Mr. Murati.
Yes, Chairperson. I think we this issue of surcharges keeps on coming up all the time, and maybe just a little bit take the committee back during the time that when we worked on it with Madam Masetti, when it involved City of Cape Town, we stretched and identified where the source of powers and under what circumstance can a surcharge be imposed. And to the Municipal Fiscal Powers and Functions Act, it identifies the issue of surcharges, and it locates that there must be norms and standards that are published by the Minister of Finance. Alternatively, individual municipalities may have to make a request. It is not a general circumstance wherein the municipality can just add a surcharge, because part of its evaluation is the purpose of the surcharge and whether the tariffs that are in existence for services rendered do not satisfy the revenue needed by the municipalities. And also the norms will also cater for circumstances of the issues of customers that are non-municipal supplied to deal with the issue of surcharge. So we had an extensive discussion, and I believe that communication was directed to the municipalities that were involved in the surcharge. But what can be emphasized is that NERSA has no jurisdiction over the issue of the surcharges by the municipalities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I think maybe just to have members that we do need to note Section 229 of the Constitution, that this is a constitutional right for municipalities. I think it's a question of how we integrate it with our pricing system, but it's not something we can wish away, because it is a constitutional requirement. Yes, the actual act itself, in terms of the as mentioned by Mr. Murati, that's also important. But we have to note that it's actually a constitutional requirement. Colleagues, it is 11:05. I think, as colleagues have indicated, that sorry, I'm for members now. As colleagues have indicated that for the areas where there is enhancement that is sought, that will be done in the RFD that will serve before ER. And I'm assuming that the ER that we are referring to is the ER of the 25th, because we don't have much liberty. We only have June to deal with this. Thanks, Michelle. We only have June to deal with all of this 180 odd municipal tariffs. So that would be the enhancement to be made, and Ms. Massetti has made extensive comments on the chat. So that, Mr. Chavalala, please, and the team, please take into account all of the comments that have been made by Madame Massetti on the chat, and respond to and actually incorporate as much as you can. So with that, members, if I can move us towards a decision on this matter. And the decision itself, I think, explained in detail by Mr. Chavalala, and thank you for that extensive presentation. But the decision that is sought is a recommendation to ER, and that is on paragraph 13 of the submission, page 6 of 69. If we can then maybe, without me going into each one of them in detail, by show of hands, members, if we'll be able to actually recommend all of those 5 items under 13.1 to the energy regulator for approval. By show of hands, members. Okay. Thank you, Madam Massetti, Mr. Bomase, Mr. Mkize, and Mr. Sibanda. I also support and advocate it all. So, Mr. Chabalala, Mr. Mavuso, and team, you have your decision. With the enhancements that are required. Mr. Mkize, your hand is still up. Is it a lingering hand, or you would like to add something?
Apologies, lingering, sir.
All right. No, thank you, Mr. Mkize. With that, colleagues, we've come to the end of the open meeting. If we can then ask IT to stop the broadcast, and also if there are any outside stakeholders, if we can just request them to sign off, please. Mr. Dlamini, were there anybody that was requested or given permission to join this platform?